of all the couples therapy models that are in the world and in the field, uh, they have different emphasis. I mean, some will focus on attachment, some will focus on differentiation, some will focus on behavioral deals. Uh, some will focus on all kinds of ways to try to deal with couples' difficulties. And one of the things they have in common is they try to get rid of difference. And coming from Gestalt therapy at a field theoretical point of view, if you back up the lens, we became interested, originally me and then me and Rita, about what's the point of getting rid of difference? Why are people trying to get rid of difference? The couple is trying to get rid of difference. The couples therapist is trying to get rid of difference. And the model of couples therapy is trying to get rid of difference. From the field theoretical view, it becomes very clear that in the culture, in Western culture, there is a model of relationships and coupling. It's like a fish in water. Nobody notices it because they haven't seen anything different. So the model that has been around for probably 30,000 years, the model is very clear and very simple. Two become one. It's a fusion model. In Gestalt terms, it's a confluence model. And what Rita and I usually say at that point, two become one, and then there are none. And while it's not literally true, unfortunately, it's very close that two become one, and then there are none. If you look just at the divorce statistics, it looks terrible. If you look further, it looks horrible. But starting with the terrible, in Western countries, the divorce rate for first marriages is upwards of 55%. The literature would have you believe that therefore 45% of people, the marriage works, as if it's a success. That's not true. What 45% do is stay together. That may or may not have anything to do with whether this is a mutual nourishing experience for both of them. And when we look further into that, we discover what we call the secretly miserably married. And the secretly miserably married are some portion of that 45%. There's no hard data on what percentage of that 45% are staying, but not because it's mutually nourishing. They are staying for very dubious reasons. For example, they're staying because they're terrified of being alone, or they're staying because of money. They're scared of what will happen if the resources are split, the material resources. They're staying because of religion and dogma. They're staying because of social stigma of leaving. They're staying because they don't think they'll be able to survive on their own. They're staying for the children. These are not what they got married for. The marriage was supposed to be mutually nourishing. And what happens is, in a two become one model, differences are avoided, they're hidden, they're not allowed. People deal with them in very poor ways meaning they don't like the outcome. And I'll go into that in a little more detail. So they either rupture and explode, divorce, that's 55%, or of the 45%, some unknown amount. Being generous, I would say half of that 45%. Being honest, I would say 70% of that 45%. Instead of exploding and rupturing, they implode and deflate. And they become part of the secretly miserably married. They endure the marriage. If you ask them, would you do it again? They roll their eyes. If you ask them, they say, are you kidding? Am I nuts? That those jokes carry a lot of reality with it, that I wouldn't be here if I was just here for it's a mutual nourishing thing. Of course, everybody brings to the table their individual characterological issues, the issues that they deal with no matter who their partner was, based on their history, their relevant past. But that all happens within a model that says, thou shalt not be different. And couples usually have three ways of dealing with difference. All of them don't work out very well. The first one is to defer and to go along with the other. Yes, dear. The problem with that is I lose me. I'm not there. I'm not representing my truth, who I am, my needs. The second way that couples try to deal with difference is they withdraw. Then they don't have to deal with the difference, but then the loss is the other. They lose the other, they lose their connection. So the third way, which becomes the most popular way, and also the most damaging in many ways, is they attempt to get rid of the difference by changing the other. That's the definition of conflict. Conflict and difference are not the same. Difference becomes conflict when I try to change you to be like me, and you either resist or you go further and try to make me like you. Now we have an escalating spiral, usually an explosion, and then a withdrawal. So we have deferring, where I become pseudo-confluent with you and give me up, or I withdraw and I lose you and I give you up, or we're at war. And the conflictual war is the same whether it's at the dyadic level of organization or the geopolitical level of organization. When one country wants to change the other country's economic system, political system, religious system, social system to be like me and my country, and the other country resists, we have war. Most models, every model that I know of couples therapy tries to get rid of difference, as if difference is bad. And the culture has a terrible reputation with difference. The phenomenological thinking about difference is that it's dangerous, it's critical, it's betrayal, it's a fight, it's cruel, it's bad. Difference from Gestalt theory we know, and from physics, we know very clearly. A boundary creates difference. The boundary separates, but what we tend to forget is that same boundary connects. Boundaries have two functions. One is to separate, the other function is to connect. We typically forget about difference being not only a connective tissue, but the only connective tissue. The only way you can have contact is with difference. If there is no difference, you have either confluence or isolation. You need difference in order to connect. There's a synaptic in between that when my experience touches your experience, that's when contact happens, at that point. If we get rid of difference, we're into confluence or isolation, but not connection. And connection is different than contact. Contact is when I touch the other with my experience and am open to be affected by their experience. That's contact. Connection is more than that. Connection has to do with contact and withdrawal, and the movement back and forth between contact and withdrawal, which brings us to what we call, it's not original to us, the basic human dilemma. for every human being from birth till death. The basic human dilemma is essentially how to be connected to an other and maintain a self. It's very easy to dive in, become confluent and fused, and the two become one model, and lose yourself. It's also very easy to leave. I have myself, but I don't have anybody else. There's no connection. Connection requires contact and withdrawal. They are both healthy. The movement is needed to be able to separate and to touch. If you're stuck anywhere in that process, you're in trouble. It's not because in the Western model, you're stuck in confluence. It's not that there's anything wrong with confluence. What's wrong is that you're stuck. And whether you're stuck in confluence, or you're stuck in withdrawal, or you're stuck in intimacy, or you're stuck in contact, being stuck is the problem. The fluidity of self-regulation becomes impossible. The self-regulation within the relationship, within the situation, within the environment. If you don't have movement, you can't have difference. If you don't have difference, you can't have connection. You can only have either the confluence or you can have the isolation. That model informs all couples therapy models, although they have different emphasis about the individual characterological issues and the interaction of the characterological issues with each couple, but they all happen within the larger frame of two become one, of a fusion model of relationships, which is why we are advocates of a connection model. In a connection model, difference is appreciated, difference is valued, that if you can let a difference stand and you're safe enough to be able to let a difference stand, and for that you need some parity, you need some equal, you can't have it in a hierarchical power system. But if you have parity, if you have equal access and to your needs and to what you want, not more, but not less, then you have the possibility of letting the difference stand and being able to then explore the difference, engage the difference. I can become interested in what's the context for you in Gestalt terms, inviting you to explore the ground of what makes this important to you. And I can share with you my ground of what makes my point of view or my position important to me, which then begins to fill out, and you begin to understand how it is to be the other rather than just tell me why you want to do it so I can talk you out of it. I'm not talking about using it as a trick. I'm talking about it as really wanting to understand the other person's ground and wanting them to know my ground. And frequently, we can then switch to a collaborative mode. And in a collaborative mode, both of us can stand back and look at here's where I am and here's where you are. Now let's both look at the whole system together. So we now switch to a collaborative mode rather than an adversarial mode of either confluence, isolation, or war. It's a paradigm shift. It's a shift that is quite strange to people who don't even know that they live in a world, a Western world, of two become one fusion. And usually people blame it on the Old Testament. Ye shall leave your mother and father and cleave to one another and become one flesh. That's only 4,000 years old. This has been around for much longer than that. And it's very much at the sociological and anthropological level, it's very much like individual character. How is that? Okay, I'll tell you. In the situation, the biological imperative is always survival comes first. And people found ways to survive 20, 30, 40,000 years ago. They survived by living in small groups and by a two become one model. and based on the physicality of she can have babies and he can't, so he can go out and fight the lions and tigers and bears, and he can bring food. And while she's in the house, she might as well cook something. And by the way, she should send a birthday card to my mother. And I'll take care of the car insurance and the taxes and all of that gender role stuff that was, if together we make one good person. Well, as recently as 1898, the length, and when, by the way, there's very little divorce in 1898, because remember at that time, women could not vote in this country, in the States. Women could not inherit property in most places. They couldn't inherit money. They weren't allowed in guilds. So getting married and being, quote, taken care of in a patriarchal society by a man was the best show in town. It was the only show in town if you didn't want to be cleaning someone else's house with no education, no skills, no money, no land. So with virtually no divorce in 1898, I won't bother asking you, I'll tell you, the average marriage lasted 7 years. Not 25 or 40, 7 years. There were no antibiotics until the early 1900s. So women would frequently die in childbirth. They'd have one baby, two babies, third baby, they get a systemic infection and they were gone. 7 years. Well, till death do us part, that's a kind of easy gig, 7 years. You can do that. Till death do us part now is a whole different story. We are using a model and a method, a fusion model of staying together, which fit meaning it fit the situation thousands of years ago and allowed us to survive both as individuals and as a species. Because our kids need caring for a very long time before they can be on their own. Those of you who think you're finished when they're 18, I got a surprise for you. It goes on a little further than that. So the model of marriage is within the couple, and they don't even know it. And most couples therapists are looking for, which is important, the characterological issues, whatever their particular won't is, whether it's about attachment or it's about separation or about differentiation or about power or about whatever it's about. They're doing that by trying to get rid of the difference. We are looking at how to legitimize the difference in a safe way that people can then engage the difference and find out more about who the other person is and to let the other person know more about who they are. Let me take a moment here. In most couples therapy, therapists try to deal with what the differences are. And that's content. That's like your underwear. It changes every day, hopefully. It's not about what the differences are. The process work with couples is about how they deal with difference. Whether it's about a trivial thing or a really important thing or an existential issue. No matter what the scale of the difference, almost always the difficulties, the nexus of where difficulties come from in couples is how they deal with difference, not what the differences are. Now, the couple will try and stay with what the differences are. Unfortunately, many models of couples therapy stay with what the differences are and try to help the couple get rid of that difference. We are looking at the process of how do they deal with difference. How they deal with difference is the gateway. If they can deal with difference in a mutually satisfying way, then they can have the best opportunity to deal with what the difference is. But if they don't deal with how they deal with difference, they never quite get to dealing well with what the differences are, because they get into a fight early on with how they deal with difference. I could expand upon that for a lot, but for now, I just want to leave it there. The connection model allows, encourages, supports contact. It allows, encourages, and supports withdrawal. And it allows each person to have their movement. And when you find someone, if you authentically show up, you pretty soon will find out whether the other person, whether the range, your range overlaps with their range. It will never be perfect. That's the fairy tale. Your range won't stay the same, but the core of it will stay very similar, although changing over the years. If there's enough overlap, you have a system between the two of you that works. If you fake it, if you defer, if you pretend, if you avoid, then that relationship, if you're unlucky, it will work. And now you're really stuck. And really, that's with an F, not with an S. You are really stuck because now you're in a relationship that only works when you're not there. It's a job. It's a management thing. This works as long as I play the role. The precious part of a relationship is being able to be there as you are, and to know that you are valued and cherished and loved, even though you're a pain in the ass sometimes, because some people are. Anyone who isn't around here, that you know you're safe. Because the package, I've shown up and you know who I am. And you care about me. And I care about you and I know who you are. I have safety because I can trust that I'm authentic and you're authentic. And when we are who we are, there is enough overlap. If I fake it, I'm just stuck with another job. Got to go to work today and play like I like this, which is literally pain in the ass. So, just want to think if there's any more that I want to say. We do pay attention because how couples deal with difference, or the difficulty they have in dealing with difference, is obviously affected by the characterological issues that they bring to the table. The circle of relating has to do with the movement required to be able to maintain a healthy connection, which is with contact and withdrawal. And these are just arbitrary spaces along the circle. But it's a useful schema to notice where individuals within the couple either interrupt the movement from, for instance, withdrawal to contact, or from contact to intimacy, or from intimacy to confluence. They interrupt that. Characterologically, they will interrupt that sometimes. And the relevant past now is working in the characterological interruptions to self-regulation. And one interruption is to hold back. The other interruption is to jump prematurely. So if you're withdrawn, to then want to jump into intimacy when there's been no contact. These are all healthy. There's nothing here that is pathological, such a dirty word. They are all healthy. What makes it unhealthy is when it's out of phase with the situation, when it doesn't represent you and the other person. Getting stuck is one way to be in trouble. And with our model of two become one, we tend to get stuck in confluence. But as I said before, it would be equally as bad if we got stuck in withdrawal. It's stuckness that is the enemy, not the location of where you're stuck. The isolation we put out and dark, because that's very rare, that's a healthy place, but it is occasionally. Viktor Frankl talks about it in the people who survived in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. They would be able to have thick, non-permeable boundaries where they wouldn't come out and they wouldn't allow anything in. And in a horrible situation like a concentration camp, that's a way to survive. Being open and contactful and intimate would be stupid. Those people did not survive. So yes, it's very rare that you have such an extreme situation as a concentration camp, but there are times of war or crazy families, etc., that being isolated is a healthy way to survive. Again, the biological survival, that's the imperative, the first imperative, because without that, nothing else really matters. These are all good places. It's the fluidity of movement, of authenticity and support without jumping over and without holding back. So that the movement, the dance of being connected to an other and maintaining a self. That's the work to restore that self-regulation, which of course is the core of individual Gestalt therapy as well, of the restoration of choice in the service of self-regulation of that person in their current environment. Characterological histories, unfortunately, relevant past, interrupt that, whether it's in their individual functioning or their functioning within a couple.